Okay, let's go ahead and sit on down and we'll get ourselves started again because we got some good topics people are requesting and we want to be sure to have time to get you ready with everything you need for this coming week. Any introductory remarks or let's get going?
We're good to go.
Okay.
I made requests.
Very good. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and do something a little bit different now. We kind of talked about linking and this whole notion of linking being very much like X-riffing. I think people sort of get that. It's a pretty easy thing and really quite easy to do, whether you share your files over the email or whether you put them in a nice Dropbox volume or something that syncs in the background. It tends to just work out pretty well. And the only real disadvantage of doing it that way is it's just not immediate. That's its only big thing. If you can live with just updating every time you reopen the file, that's okay. And if you organize your work very carefully, that'll be okay. The big thing is really making sure that all the things in the different files line up. And we do that with these levels and grids, and we're going to talk about that again in just a minute. Well, 15 minutes. Okay, but we'll get to it. So the next thing we're going to do is actually talk about this other model, which is called work sharing, which is a little bit more complicated. This is actually the notion that you and I are actually going to work on the same model at exactly the same time. We're going to work on the same file together. Okay. And in order to make this work, the big requirement you have to have is you have to actually be on either the same local area network, and that's the way that most people do it. If you're in the same office, that's pretty easy. Okay. You can also do this through Dropbox. Okay. If you set up Dropbox in a very special way. And I have a document that explains about that. But really what you have to convince Dropbox, if you do it that way, is that everyone is looking at the file using the same path. Okay, so we each have to set up our machine so that it follows that same Windows file path. Okay, and it takes a little work to kind of get our machine set up so that we're all looking at what appears to be the same volume using exactly the same string of text. Okay, but hold that one for a minute in terms of what's going on, because I got a document that sort of explains about that. Let's just talk about where work sharing is handy, where it's useful, and how we can use it together. Okay, so for this next part, we're going to put you in little teams, and it doesn't matter if it's your real team. Let's just go ahead and put you in teams relative to where you are sitting at the desk here, or something like that. Okay, so here's the idea. We're going to share things amongst little teams together here right now, and to do this, we're going to have one person who temporarily is going to sort of drive and help set things up. Only one person on the team needs to set it up. Okay, then other people can use it. Okay, so everyone, look to your left, to your right, look into the person's eyes and say, I'd like to share my model with you. Okay, and decide how you're going to organize your team. So whatever it is, okay, and then of those, your first big discussion as a couple is, who's going to set this up and who's going to sit on their hands for the next 5 minutes? Okay, that's a tough one to negotiate as a couple, but figure out who's going to sit on their hands and who's going to work, okay? And if you need to be a three-way, that's okay too. I don't want anyone left out of this.
Open-minded here.
Exactly. Whatever works for your modeling process. Okay, so you got it decided? Okay, beautiful. How about this? Let's go out to that T drive, that file drive where we've been storing things. And I'm going to go out to that T drive and I'm going to do this. We're going to set up different folders so that each of the teams has its own little folder to put things in. Okay, because we don't want to put them all in the same place. Each team, so decide amongst yourself, give yourself a name, whatever it is, it's going to help your team decide. And what you're going to do is come out here, say new folder. Look at all those new folders coming. And this is going to be Team Glenn real quick. Okay, but go ahead and rename your folder so it's your team's name.
One person a team.
Again. This is an easy relationship. You're really only going to be together for the next 20, 30 minutes. So it's okay. Whatever sort of works. This will be one of those easy ones. Okay, so, razzle dazzle. You've already impressed me. Okay, so you're all creating folders? That is perfect. Okay, so now, can each of the different people who's not sitting on their hands, the person who's setting this up, go back over to Revit Okay. Check out that model that's kind of hanging out there, and we're going to do something to it to help it get started with this sharing notion. Let's talk about how sharing works. Sharing has a couple of different ways you can work. If you're in an office where your roles are very, very well established, you can set up what is called a work set. And a work set is, okay, we're going to take everything in the model, all those elements, and put them into a big pool. But we can say that all of the objects of some class, either they're all the ones in this side of the building, or all the furniture objects, or something that distinguishes them, we can put them into a set of objects that people can check out and reserve for themselves, and then check back in when they're done. So check out, check back in, very much like going to the library. Okay, on a shared drive. Okay, now checking out and checking in works pretty well in a big office because you have a pretty well established role and you know which objects are yours and aren't yours. But as students, it's actually kind of hard to do that because, just as soon as you check something out, you'll find out one of your teammates wants that object and you'll be kind of fussing with each other all the time about who has it and did you check it back in. So we're going to use a slightly different model. This is the model, there's that part of the library where all the magazines are hanging around and you kind of pick it up off the table and you read it for a little while, but then you put it back. Okay, you don't really check it out and go home. You kind of stay around. Okay, and that's kind of a very informal sort of system, and that's what we're going to set up here. So we're going to set up our model so everything's kind of hanging around in this big database, and when I want to grab an object, I grab it, and I start changing things. And then as soon as I'm done changing, I'm going to relinquish it. Okay? And then as soon as I relinquish, you can grab it. Okay? And the only restriction is we can't both touch it at the same time. Okay? So it's not too bad. It sort of works pretty easily. Again, all the hassles in just getting it set up, but once you see how easy it works pretty easily, once you get the hang of it. Okay, so for my setup people, okay, let us do this. You got that architectural model that's kind of hanging out. It is currently a plain old lowly Revit model. It's a database, but it doesn't really sort of look very much like a database. It's a single file out there. To make it a database that we can kind of do the sharing with, what to do is as follows. Okay, so again, just my people, my setup people, hit the Collaborate tab. We are going to set up this notion of work sets. I'm just going to say cancel that right now. Okay. It's going to say, hey, you got a lot of objects in here. I'm going to put the levels and grids, those things that are so important for us to kind of share in a very special way in a work set called levels and grids. I'm going to put everything else in one big collection called work set 1. And that's okay. That's all I want for right now. Everything in work set 1. Okay. We could get more fine about it, but work set 1's good enough. I'm going to say okay to that. It's going to chug, 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 chug. So you see a little status bar down here saying it's doing a little updating, enabling work sharing. It brings up this fantastic dialog, which basically says, hey, some guy named instructor has 2 different things checked out. He has all of the objects in instruct are in work set 1, and he has the levels and grids checked out right now. What that means is that no one else on my team can kind of work with those things. So I pretty much have everything checked out right now. Okay? No worries, we're going to fix that in just a second. I'm going to say, okay. Yeah, pretty anticlimactic. Doesn't look very different. Looks pretty much exactly the same as it used to before. But now the important part. We're going to save this away. We're going to save it in a special way. Okay, so it understands, even though it doesn't look like it's very different, that now it has this notion of work sets. There's this notion here. It's this little menu called work set 1 kind of showing up down there. It knows it's a special type of file. And for my setup people, what I want you to do is this. You are going to go to the file menu. You're going to say save, and I believe it's save as. If you say save, I think it'll stop and ask you. What we're going to do is save as your project. I am going to go put it in a special place. I'm going to put it in my team's folder. So I'm going to put mine in Team Glenn. You put yours in Team Razzle Dazzle or Team whatever you are. And just put it over there. And just to really be ever so clear that this is a special file, I'm going to type the word central after it. And that's just going to give me a clue that there's something special when I see this thing. Okay, it's the central repository, the central database. Now, in this dialog, let me just point out to you, you don't need to go here. But let me kind of point out to you what the special magic of this dialog is. Under the options, there's this whole notion of making this a central model after we save. And that's what we're doing. We're making it a central model, which is then a shared database. And it's turned on by default. It knows we need to do that. Okay? So we'll say OK to that. I point that out because later on, in the same sense that someone's going to have the origin to origin messed up, someone at some point is going to move your file. And as soon as it gets moved or renamed, something that sounds like a nice, safe thing to do, it'll complain and say, wait, the central file can't figure out its location. Something's off. So you'll have to come back and do this again at some point, saving it as a central. But the whole notion of making something a central is really just as simple as going to the save as and checking that box. So not to worry. Central's kind of a special place, but if something gets out of sync and we lose track of the central, we can always rechristen something as a central again. We can kind of promote it to that special status. Okay. Enough of all that, let's say OK. I'm going to save this away. You go ahead and save yours away, and let's see how we're doing. OK, so all our teams, one person on each of the teams, save it away. And then when you are ready, not to be outdone, go ahead and say that you want to, right up here, relinquish. So feel the zen wash over you as you relinquish and let go of your parts. You're no longer responsible for them. The rest of your team can kind of take care of them. So relinquish, let go of them. And that just frees it up so other people can go ahead and kind of work with it. So give it a relinquish. And what is that doing? All that's really doing is letting go. It's checking everything back in. So if you wanted to, you don't have to do this. If you go back to work sets, you'll see that like I don't own them anymore. You just kind of put them away. Say OK. So relinquish, make sure you do that. Okay. When you're all done, my setup people, go ahead and close. Close it all up and get out to this screen. Okay. In fact, everyone, go ahead and close and get out to this screen. We want to look at the Revit startup screen. Okay. So how are my busy my worker bees doing? They doing OK? You got it all saved away? Okay. So we are ready to start sharing. Okay, now, Team Glenn's model is pretty boring here, so I'm not going to work with Team Glenn's model. Who's Team Razzle Dazzle? Team Razzle Dazzle, I'm working with you. Okay, and let's show you how this works. Okay, from this screen, not from the desktop and double-clicking on the file. Don't do it that way. From this screen, go ahead and let's open the file. And you can either do it by under the Revit menu, choosing open, or if you like to, you can go ahead and, I guess once I do this, I can't. Look, I was going to show you can do it from the big gray screen. Okay, we're going to go navigating around. I'm going to go out there and see how Team Razzle Dazzle did. I got this thing that looks like a central file. I'm going to pause and reflect there for just a minute, because what I am hoping to see on this is this very special choice right here, which says create new local. That tells me that Team Razzle Dazzle did a good job, because they actually created it as a central file. It knows it's a central file. Work sets are set up on it. Okay, when you go in and you open it up, if you don't see that choice, create a new local, that means something's not quite right. Yeah, the file's okay. It just isn't ready to do file sharing. It's not okay. That's okay. So look for that. If you don't see that, let's pause there for a second. Does everyone see that? Does anyone not have that? Because if you don't, we just need to do a save as and kind of promote your file again. Okay, look good? Okay, if you are, we're going to say open. Let me talk about what new local does. New local says that, hey, we got this thing up on the file server. We're all sharing it. But you know, file server connections can be a little sketchy sometime, and my internet's not always so great. So rather than working directly over this network connection, how about let's make a little copy down my machine that I can work with ever so closely. So if anything goes wrong with the network, I can save my work. And then when I sync, I'll send it back up to the main file. But it's going to make a little local one. A little thing just for me. Okay. The advantage of the local thing is that it also serves a little bit of a backup. So if anything really goes horrifically wrong and someone blows up the central model somewhere else, your local is kind of a nice little backup that you could hang on to. We can promote your local to be the new central if we need to. Okay, so local is a good thing. Okay, We will say create that new local, open, and let's see how it works. Okay. Well, again, this is looking sort of uninteresting, but let me see if we can kind of show you how it works in a little more dynamically. I'm going to switch over to the 3D view. Okay, so for just a moment here, Team Dazzle and I are working together. I'm working on this model. I like some things about this model. I want to make some changes to this model. So here's what we're going to do. You know, this parapet that's over here, I kind of like it, but, you know, I don't know. I kind of, in my mind, decided I want to make it a little bit taller. So I'm going to stretch it on up. What's going to happen is, okay, I've changed my local copy right now, but the central actually understands I touched that part. Okay, so no one else can touch it till I give it back up again. Okay, so that's okay. When I am happy to give it up, I like that. I want to make sure it's out there. I can go through and do a couple things. I could just say relinquish, but what I'm going to say is actually synchronize. And let me show you how that works. Okay. When you synchronize, that's just going to do it without showing you the settings. Let me kind of show you the settings. It actually gives you a choice like this, where it really is going to put it to this location. There's this whole notion here of what sort of things you should give up. You know, there's a lot of things in here, but in general, synchronizing does this. It sends my changes out to the central, okay, and then anything that someone else has changed on the central, it brings back to me. Okay, so unlike opening and closing an entire file, which if it's a 20 or 30 meg file might be a really slow process, it just checks an object out, checks an object in. So it's pretty fluid. It's kind of quick doing that. And that's the beauty of work sharing. Okay, that you don't have to kind of keep on moving these big 30 meg files around. You can do little things. Okay, so let me go ahead and kind of just let that do its thing. And then we'll kind of check in with my team over here. Team Razzle Dazzle, how about if you make a change, something that I can see, any one of you. Just don't do all change the same thing at the same time. You can kill a window off, you can raise a parapet. You made a change? You making a change now? Okay, Razzle Dazzle us. Go ahead and if you could, after you've made a change, you say synchronize with central. What'll happen is, as she synchronizes with the central, my change should get loaded down to her machine, and her change should get put back up on the central. Okay, so far so good? Make the change? Beauty. Okay, now I didn't see any change just yet because I haven't synchronized recently. As soon as I synchronize, the latest thing will pull, and we keep on synchronizing with the current state or the central. So I can say central synchronize if I want to. Actually, let me do this without modifying the settings. I'll do that. Say OK. And hopefully we'll see some changes in here. OK, I seem to detect that you knocked out a window on the third floor there. Excellent. OK, I will see you that window and slide this one over. OK, and again, you're not seeing that yet until I synchronize again. Let me even here just say synchronize now. That's actually the quicker way to do it. Let that be the default choice. Looks like you're moving my parapet wall and starting to change the roof. And this is really the way it goes. At this point, it's almost a free-for-all. Not exactly a free-for-all, but you know, as long as we aren't touching the same things at the same time, we can be sharing with each other. So go ahead and each of your groups, go ahead and try that. So as you work in a smaller team, someone make a change, synchronize, someone else make a change, synchronize. And the only thing we're going to sort of need to coordinate is if you try to touch the same object at the same time, it'll complain. Ah, a very good question. Let's demonstrate this.
Slap on their hand.
Nah, yeah, exactly. Okay, I am going to, for example, actually, how about this? Team Razzle Dazzle, could you go ahead and touch that parapet in the background? Touch that one behind here? Just do something to it. Okay, but don't synchronize it just yet. Okay? Okay, I'm going to go over and say, I want to change that parapet. It's going to check in, and let's see if it'll do it. Say, hey, you can't edit this element until my good friend student over here goes ahead and relinquishes it. So we got sort of a problem here. She's got something open, I want to change it, I can't really do it. It's pretty good about keeping things in sync with each other. So what can I do at this point? I can just hang around and wait. Okay? Or I could say, place a request, that'll send her a little text message or a little message on her screen that says, could you please finish up already? I'm waiting on you. Okay? Or you could call her or text her or whatever it is. You gotta figure out for yourself. Are you a Skype team and instant message? No one instant messages anymore. Yeah, whatever it is that you sort of do to go ahead and communicate with each other.
Skype is the way.
Was that?
Skype is the way.
Skype is a good way. I've been using Google Plus.
Oh.
But yeah, whatever. It's every team should have its own method for coordinating. And that should be part of your process in thinking about is really how you're going to coordinate and communicate with each other. Because don't just count on the fact that since you made a bunch of changes, other people will be able to figure out what you did. You know, it's kind of hard. Okay, so I will place a request. I can either wait or as soon as you synchronize, then I'll be able to touch it. So go ahead and synchronize. Let's see what you did, and then I can go ahead and try making some more changes to it. Okay, so you're syncing. Once you've synced, hopefully I should be able to go through and make my own changes. Skylight. I meant to grab a window. Hang on. So I'll put some windows in the parapet, which is not a very good design. Okay, but I'm making some changes. So again, because I'm making the changes, you can't change the parapet right now. But go ahead. Beautiful. Let me go ahead and sync, and let's just give you a minute to kind of play with that. You know, just go ahead and for each of the different teams, just sort of mess around with that for just a minute and see if we can sort of get into some little holes with it. But really, it's all about this notion of making sure that you relinquish as soon as you can. As soon as you relinquish, then everything's kind of good. So, and especially at the end of the day, making sure that before you go off to San Diego for the weekend, you go through and relinquish things so people can still get to things and access them. So let's think about this as part of the process in terms of how it's going to work. It's a very fluid sort of thing. It's kind of very quick to do things and share things together. Again, the requirements are you need some sort of a good network connection, or we can set up Dropbox to do it. Okay, so there's a little bit of networking sort of hassle. It's a little more involved in sending you a file. Okay, it also sort of inherently has this notion that we're able to touch each other's parts. So like, I really trust you. It's, I'm not only giving you the keys to my house, I'm giving you my wallet, my credit card, and everything else. You get everything. Yes.
At my workplace, we use Central File.
Yes.
And we're like maybe 10 people or 15 people working on the same model at the same time. But we don't use that relinquish. There is a different way to do
In the Central File, in an office, often what we'll do is we'll set up these work sets where I can check out a work set. I can put, say, all the furniture or all the interior walls or all the structural columns into a set and then check them out as a group. And then at the end of the day, check them back in. So in that sort of scenario, you don't need to relinquish this often. You sort of hang on to the work set, for half a day or for a few hours, and you sync every once in a while. So it's really just, do you want the complexity of the checking out or the fluidity? And if you need to do the fluidity, then you need to do a lot of relinquishing so that no one hangs on to you really like checking out part by part. But no, you're right. In an established office, often you'll set up these work sets that then sort of mean less relinquishing. Yes?
Actually, as you say, we are able to access the same element. Both of us are able to access the same element. We are able to change it without even synchronizing. But the problem that we are facing is if he synchronizes first, then I won't be able to synchronize.
Yeah, I think there actually may be a small problem just the way it's especially just set up inside this room, in that since you both have this name student, it's a little confused about what's going on. So let me even kind of talk about that, because you do need to give yourself a unique name. That's part of how it sort of figures out. I think it's confused because you're both considered student. So let me kind of talk about that, sort of a unique thing that we have in our environment here. Let me do this. I'm going to go ahead and close out. What I'll do is relinquish. And I will close out over here. Okay. And before I even get in, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to options and give myself a new name. Actually, it knows I'm instructor GLK. It must know that because I was the last person to do this. Okay. If you go to options and you go to, I guess just the general pane, it probably says student in there. And if it does, go ahead and change that so it's something unique about you. Put your initials in there, something just to help it distinguish. We're sort of confusing it because if we both try to use the same name, it doesn't know what to do. So I think that's what it's sort of doing to you. It's allowing you to do that.
I was wondering what JLK is. I didn't think about it.
It's there's a Lee in the middle there somewhere.
Oh, what is the S stand for?
What's that?
What does it stand for?
Oh, Lee.
Oh, Lee.
Yeah. I always say Leroy, but it's not. I just like that name better. Okay, so you never knew. Okay, so let's think about it in terms of some sharing. How are we doing? You got the general idea, kind of like things open, things close, things do all that kind of stuff? Beautiful. In a way, it sort of works really, really easily. You know, there's not a whole lot to it as long as kind of people sort of stay put. That also works. Let me tell you about the yes.
Is there any log for all the changes moving to work?
Actually, there is. I have to figure out where it's buried alive in this interface, but there is, and you can sort of back things out. Okay, but even better is that whole notion if you kind of keep locals around, it's like having backups. But no, there actually is some history to this. You know, you can't actually replay it that, you know, Glenn did this, Burton did this, you did this, and kind of, yeah. Okay, but it's kind of hard to back out. Okay, let us cancel out of here for a second and talk about the sort of file setup side and how this could get in trouble. Okay, that's, yeah, always the part you have to watch out for. It's never how it works well, it's how you might get in trouble. And that is as follows. Okay, so Team Razzle Dazzle and I have been working along here so far. We're looking just fine. Everything's feeling pretty good. Because I'm such a good file administrator, has decided, you know, I really should go through and just change the name of this and say that this is the version, you know, what is it, 14.01, was it 29 today? Something like that. Okay. I have just messed things up for the rest of my teammates because it actually sort of depends on this stupid path name, this string of text, which is the path name. So that's a little bit, you know, bothersome. What happens is, if anyone changes the name or moves the file, which will change the path, okay, it'll get confused because it stores the path as a string, and if it can't find things at that string location, it gets sort of confused. Not to panic. Okay, we can always go back and rename it, or we can take anyone's individual file and save it as a central, but that sometimes happens, is you get things like this. So let me show you what the effect of that would be, and I'll apologize if I sort of mess things up for my poor teammates over here. But if I open, and I go back to Team Razzle Dazzle, and I click on here, because I've renamed it there, my create new local's not there anymore. Okay, that's a problem. It sort of understands that it's not quite right. Okay, not to worry too much. I can open this and save it as and make it a local again, or I can go back and change the name, whichever is going to be easier for you. Okay, so how would I do that? I would say open. Okay, yeah, it's really upset about this. You know, it's like it doesn't like this. But not to worry, it's still not too happy. But what I can do is do a save as. I'll save it as a project. Okay, and then, let me go ahead. I'll give it its old name back again, just because I like that name better. But here's the critical part you have to do. It's options, make this a central. Okay, that's all you need to do. So if you lose your central, just choose one and make it a central.
There are a number of backups. Is there a maximum number you can put, or?
Yep. No, it defaults to like 20, but you could put hundreds if you really want to. It depends on just how much clutter you want to keep around. Okay. So now we're back in business. So next time you open it under the new name, things will be good. Let me quit out of there. Let me make a small change to this. Goodbye, Parapet. Okay, and once again, I'm going to be done. I'm going to go through and synchronize. Put everything back, say OK. I'm going to close it up. Okay, so next time I come back in, notice it's there. I can say create new local. Okay. Now a slightly different question here. This is actually sort of a good question as opposed to those ones that are nagging you. This is saying, hey, okay, you told me to create a local, but I already got a local. So do you want me to just overwrite the last local, or would you actually like me to timestamp this and put a little suffix on the tail end to kind of indicate the time? And actually, that's a pretty good choice. If you got disk space, just doing this whole sequence of ones that is timestamped is really, really good. Because then you can say, it's 7 o'clock, I really messed it up. Get me back to the one that I opened at 6 o'clock, or get me back to the one that I opened at 5 o'clock. So I tend to accept this and say, just go ahead and do the timestamping. Okay, so I will append that. Okay, we're back in business. So in general, it kind of works out, but that's the big thing you have to watch out for. Now, to get yourself set up with this, for teams that want to go ahead and do this, let me kind of share a document with you that can help you out, that is all about how you can go through and do this. And that is, if you go through and you're using Dropbox, so as opposed to having a local area network, if you want to try and do this through Dropbox, so through some sort of cloud service, that's actually not too bad. The idea is you need to go ahead, and ultimately it's all dependent on path names, and everyone sort of has to kind of think about the path in the same way. So I can install Dropbox or Box. I'm not too picky about that. The default thing, though, for Dropbox is it puts it at this location. It's users, your name, and then Dropbox. And that's where we're going to get in trouble if you use Dropbox, because your name is not the same for everybody. You'll have a unique sort of part of that. So what you got to do is, when you install Dropbox, is actually say that you want to do some advanced setup, choose where you put it, and instead of putting it at, Glencat's Dropbox, just put it at C Dropbox. And that is then C Dropbox will be the same location on everyone's machine, so it'll be okay. So that's the only thing you have to do to spoof it into believing that it will work, is that you just have to give it that same path name. So again, in terms of trying to set that up, if you're trying to do something like this with Dropbox, there's a document out here. Go ahead and download that. Just try to follow those directions. If you get stuck on that, write to me. I think my email address is on there, but whatever, you guys have it too.
Yeah.
And whatever, we'll help you get through setting it up.
Joseph, can you get this and put it in Blackboard as well?
Beautiful, and we do all sorts of, we'll go to meeting sessions, whatever it is to get you going. But really, for each of the teams, one of the things to do is just as a team, kind of decide amongst yourselves, okay, linking looked kind of interesting, work sharing looked kind of interesting, but it sounded, well, I'm not sure. You got to figure out as a team how you want to approach this in terms of dividing it up. And then after you sort of decide that, just kind of, see if you can sort of get that set up in the next day or two to kind of really give yourself a good foundation so you can all start working independently, but in a way that adds up, so you can all share your work. That sure makes sense? Beauty. Okay.
And I think from my experience in this class, I recommend Dropbox option versus the local area network version.
We've had a lot more luck with that.
We had a lot more luck, and in one case that they actually did the local area network, it was very troublesome, but also I think there was another problem. They lost the computer they were storing in. You remember that? They have seen blue screen and everything they've done to that thing was gone.
It's hard to set up a shared volume if your network administrator hasn't sort of set it up that way. And at USC, it's not set up well to be sharing a network volume, so the Dropbox method works pretty well.
With Dropbox, pretty much it works very well.
Okay, whereas in your office, where you have a nice local area network and you have a team and an IT administrator, they set it all up and it works very flawlessly if you're all connected that way.
On the server.
Exactly, and it just works. If only we had big shared servers, but we set ourselves up differently, and it adds a layer of complexity how we have to set up. Okay, so that's it in terms of the big work sharing methods. But what I want to start with you guys and ask a question. Yeah.
Sorry, I had a question about the
Please.
Dropbox, but I've heard that when you're doing a central file with Dropbox, the only problem that it runs into sometimes is if one or the other person that's working on the file has a slower network, you might not get the updates as fast, and you might get a corrupt file after.
It's interesting. 2 years ago, that was definitely something I worried about. It's gotten a lot better because I think it can really handle it almost on a file-by-file basis. I haven't seen that happen with a lot of classes over the last 2 years. I have had it in the past, but no, that is an issue. And it's really if two different versions of the file are trying to be modified at exactly the same time.
And then if you're offline also too, right?
But yeah, if you're going to do this Dropbox thing, make sure you're on. Because, being offline will sort of defeat the purpose. So don't go doing this and then kind of pause your Dropbox syncing and make a whole lot of changes, because you'll go down that path of you'll think you're making good changes, but other people are working independently. So now, if you really need to be offline, then you're a file linking team. Yeah, if you really are online, good connections, we can all agree to use Dropbox, then a work sharing team could be really convenient. But you got to figure out which way it's going to be. Yeah, so watch out. But the best news is, even if you do some major corrupting blah, 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 because some of you have saved locals on your machine, okay, we may lose that last half hour, okay, but you're going to back up and we're going to use your last local and promote it to be the new central. So again, it'll happen to every team at some point. There'll be something that looks like a catastrophic loss, and we'll just have to go to, do a little fixing, but you'll be back up again in 20 minutes. Yeah, that just happens. And using this can be big teams. When I was doing this with a big class at Yale, we had 10 different people working on a building at the same time, where someone was doing windows and someone was doing wall features and someone was doing just pieces. And it works actually pretty well. It does a good job of maintaining it as long as the network's good.
Let me ask a question.
Certainly.
How can we get ourselves in trouble with linking files? Can we create indefinite loops?
No, it will not let you create an indefinite loop. So if I link in Burchin's file, but she's linked in my file, what'll happen is when I try to load in hers, it'll say, hey, there's a second-hand link that's basically referring to yourself, so I'm not going to load that. It's smart about that, because we do that as, the structural engineer, he'll link in the geo and the architecture. The architect, she's going to link in the geo and the structure. You'll kind of cross-link to each other from all these different directions, and that's okay. It won't double load you. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so you've got to decide how you want to do that. What we want to do with the last little part of class, though, is actually show you how to set up your files so you can get started kind of doing all this. And just really, there's a way to do this, where if we set up the framework, that's the levels and grids and all that kind of stuff, and the linking between the files we're going to be using, we can kind of get pretty smart about how they're going to work with each other. So that's what I'd like to do with the last little chunk of this. Okay, so let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead and actually open up the building files that I believe you guys have been given. No, not sample data, where is it? Building D. Okay, and what do I got? I got some 2D drawings in here. So somewhere in here, there's a lot of information that we can look at and try to use to help us get started. And half of the battle is really just going through and just trying to understand all the layers and the views, and there's so much information. It's quite hard when it comes to you in 2D layers. Looks like this is the main architectural plan. That's kind of looking okay. I'm wondering in all this if there is something that has some grids for us to sort of follow. And I would almost guess that a structural system would have it. And those are wall elevations, roof, second floor plan. Let me go to that. Yes. Okay. The structural people often have the grids. So let's go take a look at how this is set up. They've already set up some grids, and I could make up my own grid system, but why bother? They actually have one where you can actually sort of see a good recommendation for how they laid out the grids relative to the different shapes and jigs and offsets in the building facade and stuff like that. So they're giving you a pretty good structural grid to work with. So figure out what the structural grid is. I'd probably set mine up to be very similar to the one they did, because they've thought about this. I would also go ahead and, so we'll need that grid information. Let's see if we can figure out the levels. And for the levels, I would probably start with, like the elevations. The elevations usually have those. Let's see if we can get some information there. Oh, that's pretty good. Let me, in here, in that same sort of way, see if I can kind of bring that around. It's actually just being slow. What are you doing? You can sort of see how they've set up the levels. Level 1 is 0, 100, 110, 121, stuff like that. Okay, so definitely dig around a little bit and see what information you can glean from all these documents, because that'll help you. Okay, so let's go back over to Revit and think about how we can use these things. So what I want to do first is just set up kind of my horizontal layering system. Then I'm going to set up my XY kind of grid system. Okay, I'm going to do it in a single file first. Okay, maybe in my architectural file, and then I'll kind of use it to sort of spawn off some files if I'm going to link some files and keep them separate. If you're all sharing a single file, you only have to set it up once. Okay, but linking is where we have to kind of be a little creative. So what do we have here? In terms of this, oh, what is it? Level 1, it looks like they're putting at 100. Okay, level 2 or 1.5, interesting. That's usually some sort of half level, maybe it's a mezzanine or something like that. It looks like it's 111. Okay, what else we got in here? Level 2, 121.4, or 121-4. And finally, oh, roof, 136. So let's start with that and kind of get that piece of the information in there. I'll leave the tower out now. You can multiply and kind of make that happen. So we'll go back over to Revit and see if we can make this happen. We're hanging out in Revit here. I can close up that old architectural file. This is, again, something that I would say, I'll relinquish a lot. You know, one person can set up the original grids and framework and levels, and then you can share it with your other teammates. You don't need all of you to do it. If you want to do it now, just to kind of get the practice, please do. But I'm going to start with the architectural template. Okay, I have this thing. It's basically a big blank drawing space. We're kind of looking at an XY view of level 1 right now. Those little things we're looking at, those are elevation markers. So those are cameras looking at the different sides of the building. So we can move those around later. But to start with, let's go ahead and set up these levels. That's my starting point. And I'll go into the elevations. And you can really do it in any elevation. Doesn't really matter which one it is. I'll just go to south, kind of by convention. We want to start changing these things. So if, for example, I want level 1 to be at 100, looks like they've already created level 1 for me. That's a pretty good starting point. I'll just click on down here and type 100. Okay, it's actually way above us right now because it just shot up to 100 feet in the air. Okay, we are also going to go to level 2, and I can go through and make that 121.4. So let's talk about that. As you are typing things in here, you could go ahead and do this. That's actually a real pain to go through and kind of type the feet and the inches and all that type stuff. You could actually go ahead and type in that. And that'll work too. It'll understand the first one as being feet, the second one as being inches. That would be 4.5 inches. Or that would be 4.5. Either of those will sort of work. But actually, all you really need to do is like that, 121.4. It'll understand the first is being feet, the second is being the inches. Okay, now, those things are still here. They're just way up top. Let me do a little zoom out here. I'll say zoom to fit. So there's level 1 and level 2. They're just up a little bit higher right now. Okay, I'm ready to add some more levels in here. I'd like to get a roof level in there at 136. Okay, if I need to create a new level on the Architecture tab, there's this Level tool. And I can either draw levels or I can offset. If you're familiar with a lot of drafting and you're used to the notion of kind of picking a line and offsetting a copy a certain distance, you might like to do that. It's really quick. Drawing is another way to do it, but all that offsetting, it's a really good, if you're very familiar with drafting and kind of are good with those sorts of tools, offsetting is a very useful way, but I'll just draw it for now. So what I'm going to do is go through and draw the levels, and I'm going to just pull across. You'll see it'll grab level 3. Okay. Two things wrong with my level 3. One is it's supposed to be at 136. The second is it's supposed to say roof. So I'll fix both of those things. I can click in there and make it 136. And I can choose the name and make it roof. Notice actually, as I've been working, over in the project browser on the right-hand side, it created a level 3. Every time you create a new level, it creates a floor plan view for that level. So it just puts a camera in there, creates that. If you start changing the names of the levels, it'll ask you this: would you like to rename the views? And that's generally a good thing to do. Sure, keep them in sync. That way I don't have to worry about mapping into my own brain all the time. So now it's changing it to roof. Okay, we got one more level to add to this. I'll put level 1.5 down in here. Notice as it works, it uses this notion that it always picks up the last name and increments it. So it's coming back and saying level 4 because the last thing you put down was level 3. That's okay. I'm going to just go ahead and change that to level 1.5 now. Rename it. Sure. And then let's get the height right. 111 feet. So 111, you don't have to put the 0 in there. It'll just sort of understand that as being feet. Okay, let's take a look at this for a second. You'll notice that I have my 2 new levels. They don't seem to be as long as the other levels. It really doesn't matter. It's more of a graphical thing than it is, breaking up the model. There really is a cut plane at that kind of level that we can sort of base geometry. We can take all our parametric building objects and put them on those levels, and that thing will be that level will be the base parameter. It will be the base property. If you want to, though, you can go ahead and sort of fix those a little bit. For example, I can grab that and just pull the end of it, and it'll sort of snap, even suggesting that, hey, would you like to lock it to that? And that's just kind of a graphical thing. But levels are actually what they persist. Although there is something about, well, there's a subtle difference in terms of how they show up in floor plan views, or if you do want them to show up or not. Sometimes it's hard for me to grab that guy. Let's try again. There we go. Not quite there. I'll just pan over a little bit further. Okay, we've set up all our levels in the south elevation. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so you're thinking, okay, great there. Now I have to go set them up in the north elevation. I'm going to have to go set them up in the east elevation. So you go on over to east, and you say, whoa, they're already there. And that's the way we like it, because you don't want to have to set them up. You really have a single level. It just shows up in all the different views. Okay, so start by giving yourself the levels. Okay, are levels looking pretty good? How are you guys feeling about levels? Well enough? You following along? You got some levels to look at? Okay, again, one person set up your levels. Those are going to be important to us later. Okay, next up, we're going to set up some grids, this whole XY system. And I'm just going to put some grids down, and you're going to put them down more carefully because you're going to put them down into locations that the plans dictate. But I'll try to follow along somewhat similar, but I won't be too careful about my dimensions right now. So I'm going to go back over to my PDFs. Let's see what I got here. Oops, there's a menu there if I actually pause long enough. I should do that too, shouldn't I? Okay, so it looks like I got sort of an A, B, C, D coming from left to right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 coming from top to bottom. Okay, hold that thought. So I'm going to go back over to Revit. I'm going to put some levels down. Does it matter what level I put the grids down? No, it doesn't. There's sort of, actually, there is something about, we can control which grids or which levels grids appear on. Okay, but yeah, it doesn't really matter. It sort of gets to sort of where the level marker is. But again, fine point. Don't worry about that just yet. Grids are right under levels. They're right here. Oh, to put the grids down, I do need to be in a floor plan. So let's go to level 1 or 2 or wherever you want to. Okay, and I'll put some levels down or grids in here. Again, I can draw them or offset them. I'm going to draw them. I'm always bad about remembering this. Do I come down like that? No, it looks like I go up instead. Okay, I'm going to do it the other way. I'm going to come from the bottom to the top just so my grid bubbles appear in the same way they do in the other view. Let's take a look at that for a second. You'll notice it is grid number 1 right now. Okay, it uses this incrementing scheme. If you want A, B, C, D, change it to A, and then it'll do B, C, D. Okay, if you leave it as 1, next it'll be 2, 3, 4. So go ahead and change that to A. Once I have A there, I can go ahead and start drawing B, C, D. I'll grab the grid, kind of come up right next to it. That'll be B. I'll come up somewhere else. That'll be C. I'll come up a little bit further. That'll be D. Okay, and again, these are all parametric. So if, for example, after I put these down very quickly, you decide that that really isn't 33 feet away, that's 40 feet away, you can just type that dimension in there and kind of adjust them after the fact. Okay, so get some A, B, C, Ds going in one direction. We're going to get some 1, 2, 3s going in the other direction, and we'll be ready to roll. Okay, I'll come this way. Oops, it's this way if I want the head to be over there. Looks like you start at the tail and go to the head. That's kind of interesting. I never remember those things. That's why I always have to test it once. Okay, for here, I'm going to change it to 1 first. Okay, and I can draw the other grids. Actually, let me just kind of show this. For people who are familiar with offsetting and CAD tools, let me just show you how that works, because it's really very handy once you have you do things that way. Instead of drawing, I can use this little tool over here. That's called an offset, or a pick line, and you can enter an offset. So for example, if I want a line that's 20 feet away from that line, I can put in a dimension, if I type properly, and I can just actually pick on that line, and it'll sort of suggest the location. So I can pick, kind of a quickie way to get it. So again, if picking sounds confusing, draw. If picking sounds easy, go for it. It just saves you some time. For all these things, there's always ways to save yourself time. And as you get started, I like to let you know so that if you do it, most things I do it 4 or 5 times the inefficient way, then I think, there must be some easier way. So it's nice to know sort of what those are. Okay, we have created, it looks like a whole lot of nothing, because we got some grids, we got some levels, we don't have any building elements in there, but we have this thing I'll call the framework. And that's the important part. Before you start throwing any walls down and all the doors and windows in there, get this framework down, get that right, and share it amongst yourselves. And then you can all work independently putting the elements in there, but you'll all be working off that same framework, and it'll keep you in coordination with each other. So always start with a framework. Okay, so are people pretty good on this notion of a framework? If this has all been going by very fast to you, because it's kind of new Revit, maybe new to you, let me just go ahead and save this out there on the file server. I'm going to put it on the T drive, so if anyone wants to grab it from the T drive and just use it so you can keep on following along, you can. And I won't put it in Team Razzle Dazzle's folder. I'll put it out there kind of at the high level. I'm going to call this is just my project grids and levels. So I'm going to save it out there. If anyone wants to grab this and use it as a starting point so you can kind of keep on following along in class, go for it. Just, it's out there for you on the T drive. So I got this fantastic framework hanging around here. It's looking pretty good in terms of what's going on. I am ready now to start doing the architectural modeling, if I want to. Okay. Oh, I'm just going to put a wall or 2 in there. I'll go out and grab a wall. Now, walls have all sorts of different types here. And as you do your modeling, you're going to learn about walls and getting more and more specific about the wall types. So as a starting point, we have this notion of levels of detail and building levels of detail. And as a starting point, just to get going modeling the building quickly, you may choose generic walls where we really haven't thought very much about the materiality and all the layers. Very often just going to get something out very quickly, you do generic. It's kind of like just this generic mass material. And that's okay. We can start with that and kind of get a little more specific otherwise. When we're doing generic modeling, that's more like level 200, level 1. It's a very low level of detail. Okay? And super. It's an okay way to get started. So if I know that, for example, my building is kind of up in this corner, I can start with this whole notion of level 2 or just this generic modeling. And let's talk about how we could draw on level 1. I'm going to make a model that goes up, these walls just go to level 2. I sort of specify the top and bottom constraint. I can specify this notion of really, as I go drawing lines, what is this line representing? Okay, and as I place the walls there, it could be representing the outside face of the wall. It could be representing the inside face. It could be representing one of the faces of what we call the core. It's kind of the structural layer. Typically, it's where the steel is or the block is. And if you look at your drawings carefully, you'll start to see really what that represents. And let me go look at your drawings ever so briefly. Right click, thank you. Over here, see if we can figure it out. I'm going to zoom on in there. Pan around. Zoom in even closer. Okay, you see those grid lines, what do they seem to be representing? Is it the inside, the outside, or somewhere in between? Yeah. That's the inside? That looks like the outside to me. We have different ways of talking about this. I guess it depends. I should show you more of the building so you can sort it out. This is at the foundation level. It's typically the outside face of the concrete. As we get higher up in the building, it may be representing the inside face. Very often the structure lines up. So we'll want to go through and place these. So let's go ahead and, yep, that's there. Okay, let's go back over to our rep model and we'll place these walls. So as we're placing, if that's going to represent not the center line of the wall, but the finished face of the exterior, we could choose that. I'm actually going to choose core face just because I've done this a couple times before. I'm betting that concrete face is actually going to line up with the face of some structural elements on the upper floors, and that will be the core face. So either finish or core. It turns out when we're doing generic, it won't really matter because the core and the outside face are the same thing. But I'll just go through and I'll choose and I'll draw from here to here, and I'll come over here, and I'm just drawing some shape. But the nice thing about what I'm doing right now as I'm placing the walls, and I'm actually using the grid lines to place the walls, is there's a little bit of intelligence built into the model now. Those walls really are on the grid lines. So later on, if we change the grid lines, we'd like the walls to move with the grid lines. They're not in an arbitrary place. They're actually very intricately related to where those grid lines are placed. And that's going to be useful to us later. If we're going to go through and place objects, having the grid lines in place lets you put things relative to the grid lines, which then gives you a much stronger model, a much more cohesive model later on. So that's enough of what I'm going to do right now. My architectural model, that's all I'm going to put into it as a starting point. My architects are going to keep on going on that, and I'll say save as. If you choose to organize yourself that way, there's lots of ways to organize. I'm going to save this project. I'm going to use this as my architectural starting point. So I got some grids, I got a few architectural elements in there. Okay, now we are ready to get the other disciplines they're sharing. And it could be architects versus structure versus mechanical. It could be left side of the building versus right side of the building, or level 1 versus level 2. It doesn't really matter how you divide it up. As long as you have the same framework, it'll all come back together and sync properly the way it's supposed to. So start with this framework. Okay. Once you have your framework, we are ready to go ahead and kind of create another model. So close this one up. I'm hanging around back out here from the nothing point. I'm going to say new again. Oh, I can open it with the architectural template. That's fine. Got this big blank starting point, and you're saying, okay, he's going to make me go through and do all that leveling and do all those grids and do all that stuff again, and you're thinking that's sounding really, really boring. But I'm not going to make you do that, because there's actually a way we can sort of copy things over from that other file and use them together. So let's talk about that. So this is the critical part about hooking up the initial linkages and getting that framework copied over that's going to give you so much power. So even if it's like, oh, you're hanging on and just barely kind of making it through the end here, try to perk up for this last 10 minutes, because this is where it gets really interesting, or important anyway, towards what you need to do. Interesting, I don't guarantee, but important. Okay, so here's what to do. You start with this thing. I will go to that insert. I'll link again, because I love to link things. Okay, I'm going to choose that architectural starting point, and I am so tempted to double click and just pull that right in, because it seems so easy. But I haven't quite done this yet, so watch out for that. Ooh, I need to get that origin to origin. Yes?
Did you save it as a template or as...
I just saved it as a project file. Template's a whole nother good concept. So we'll talk about it a different time. Okay.
Do you want to link grids and levels or architecture?
Oh. Actually, it's sort of a very good point. I really want to do whichever one is the one that's going to sort of control it. So since I'm going to use architecture as actually the controlling one. That's actually a very good point. What I probably should have done before I started copying all those architectural walls in there is actually do, as Bertrand's suggesting, let the grids and levels stand separate. Actually, I'm going to follow your suggestion. I think it's a good one. Rather than going to architectural, I'm going to link to the project starting point. What I really should have done was actually started my architecture by linking to it and then putting them in that linked file. That would have been stronger. Yeah, good idea. I learn things from you every time. Okay, so we'll say open. Okay, looking so blank, looking so uninteresting. What's going on here? We're not seeing anything at this point. Gotta make sure I did it right for a second. Did I do that? Now I got the new one there, project there. That should be okay there. Let me try something for just a second. Oh, I see. Here's my problem. This is kind of an interesting problem you should know about. Our building's up at like level 100. Okay, by default, it creates buildings down at like 0. Okay, I wasn't able to see anything, so I'm kind of panicking, saying something's definitely wrong here. The problem is at level 0, or 5 feet above level 0, looking down, I'm not seeing anything because it's 100 feet above my head. I came to the elevation, I could sort of see that it was a little bit better. So that's what was going on there. Good suggestion, though, about linking on myself. I do that all the time. So what I'm going to do here is as follows. I actually have a level 1 here in my linked file. I have a level 1 in my new structural file. I want to actually sort of get those things together. I also have a level 2, and I can sort of tie those together too. But what I usually do is this. I actually just usually go through and knock out the level 2. Say goodbye to that. And then what I'll do is, well, you always need one level. This is kind of where this sort of breaks down a little bit. But what I'll do is I'll take that level and I'll move it up to the same level as that one. And boy, that's looking very, very clunky. So rather than just kind of trying to make it almost happen, I'm going to actually type in the level. Okay, so now what I have is, it's going to be a little confusing. I have these levels from the linked file, okay, 1.5, 2, and roof, and I have 2 versions of level 1. I have level 1 in my file, and I have level 1 in the linked file. Okay, what I would like to do is actually copy in all those levels from the linked file, okay, in a way that lets me kind of stay attached to what's going on there. And here's how you do that. You come on over, and once we have linked the file in there, we can under collaborate. That's where all this stuff happens. You can do something called copy monitoring. Let's talk about why you'd want to do that. Copy monitoring copies things in, but does it in a very special way. And then not only am I going to copy you in here, but later on, if you should happen to change something back over there while I wasn't looking, it'll notify me that you changed things, so I'll know and have the opportunity to kind of adapt your changes or reject them. So it's like a live copy as opposed to a kind of a severed copy. It's not just a snapshot, it's like a clone. So I'm going to say copy monitor. I'm going to copy something from a linked project, and I'll choose just that kind of grid and like a level system. And I'm going to go through and choose some things to copy. I can choose the copy tool. I can even copy multiple things if I want to. Let me grab 1. Let me grab 2. Let me grab 3. Oops. Is it doing it? I think it's doing it right now. And then finish. Okay. Copy 1, copy 2, copy 3. I'm control clicking to get them all. Finish my select. No, it's already been there. It's not very interesting in terms of what's going on. So I actually now have, theoretically, in here, let's check to make sure. Actually, I do have a level 1.5. I can tell because if I hover over it, I can actually select it. Where if it was the linked one, I wouldn't be able to. Like over here with these grid lines, I don't have that. So in my file right now, I do have a level 1, level 2, or level 1.5 roof, all those sort of things. Okay, let me finish that up for a second. You are saying, this This isn't very interesting. I don't have level 1.5, level 2, and roof over here over in the project browser. I don't see those things. By default, when you copy the levels, it doesn't automatically create the plan levels, but we can fix that pretty easily. We'll say View, and there's a choice about creating new plan views, floor plans. And I can choose the different levels that I want to create, and this will create floor plan views that match the levels that I don't already have, so they'll show up in the browser too. Okay, so now that's a little bit better. Okay, if you get the levels copied across, you're doing pretty good. You also want to go through and copy those grids across, and let's show you what that looks like. So to copy the grids across, I'm again going to go say copy monitor from the linked project. I'll choose that linked project. And I am now ready to do some copying, either the multiple method. Okay. If you're going to do multiple, you can click on these independently, or if you're really slick, you can just like drag around them all and grab them at once. Say finish that. I finish my selection. Then I can finish using copy monitor. And let me kind of show you something here that's kind of important. See that little thing that looks like a little pulse, looks like a little heartbeat or something like that? That indicates that this object is actually linked to something somewhere else and you're monitoring it somewhere else. So the good news about that is if anything changes in the linked file, I'm going to know about it. Okay, and get the option of changing it. Okay, so at this point, I've got a new file. It's got copied grids. It's got copied levels. We are ready to go. So what I should do over here is do a save as. Let me call this something like, oh, this should actually be my starting point for arc, struct, and MEP, or anything, because once I've already kind of copied them all in there, I can really use that and do save as's from here. I don't have to kind of, only one person has to do the copy monitoring. Save that away. Okay, so now I have the original grids, I have this linked copy of the grids, I am ready to start putting my objects in. So, in those different versions, let me do a save as. So I can make a version for the architect to work with. I'll just put it right over that last one there. Okay, this is going to be the version the architect's going to work in. It has all those copy monitored grids, all those sort of things. The architect's going to go ahead and start working with these walls and place them in there. Don't do that. Oh, because I'm on the roof level right now. It doesn't like it. Let me do it on level 1. Wall, up to level 2. Kind of like I did before. Okay, that's my architectural version. I can save that one away. I can also now go ahead and open up that starting point, which has all those linked things into it. And I can save it as the structural version. I'll just call it structural starting point. Save that away. Okay, now we're ready to start putting some structure in here. Okay, let's talk about that briefly, just so you have a sense in your last 10 minutes here of how to start modeling structure, because I know some of you will want to start working on that aspect in addition to the architectural features. And let's get to go. Do I have to 5 or 4:50?
4:50, but.
Okay, give me 5 more minutes. Okay, it'll be worth it in terms of like getting you started. Okay, you got these grids in here. You are so ready to start putting columns and beams and all these elements in here. All those things are really just Revit families, and they're easy to load, get started with. Let me show you how, and it can actually go pretty quickly. Here's the deal. I set up all these grids. Things are looking pretty good. It's ready for some structural elements. You are ready to start putting some structural elements in there. So, as opposed to hanging out over on the architecture tab, you go over to the structure tab. Like architecture, yeah, most of you will figure that out in terms of doors to windows, things like that. Structure, we're going to come on over. We are going to start placing different elements, and you'll do things like, go ahead, I know there's something interesting about your foundations. We'll talk about that next time in terms of how to model that special thing you need for your foundations. I'm going to start with like the columns and the beams and stuff like that, because that's sort of a good place to get going. Okay. If I choose, for example, the column tool, It's a type of object. You'll see it has some sort of type in here, like a W10 by 49. In your drawings, you go digging around, you'll figure out what size the columns are, whether they're concrete, whether they're steel, what size they are. If it is something like W10 by 49, you can just go ahead and choose that. If it isn't W10 by 49, you can load in a family. And this is something we do a lot with Revit. If you need something that's not already there, we go to structural columns, steel, all the W-shaped columns. The imagineers are mostly wide flange, but if there's another structural steel shape, you can find it there. You'll find this incredible catalog of all the different shapes. Okay. Don't go ahead and load them all in. Load in the ones you need. If you load them all in, your file gets heavy and just slows down. Load in the ones you need. So I don't need a 10 by 49. I think I need some biggies there. How about a 14 by 43? I'll load that in. I'll say OK. It's already in there. OK, that's fine. So I am ready to go ahead and place it. When I am placing columns, it's very much like placing walls. I'll come to structure, column. You have this notion of, am I going to be placing things down or up? And it depends on how you think about things. If you're a structural engineer, you'll tend to go to level 2 and place columns below level 2. If you're an architect, you'll tend to go to level 1 and place columns up. Doesn't matter. Either way works. You just got to sort of be consistent in your scheme. So since we're in a civil engineering class, I'm going to go to level 2 and go down. I'm going to do a depth, so I'm going to go from level 2 down to level 1. Okay, and I can start placing these columns. And if I go placing them here, I can drop one right in here. I can drop one right on there. I can do things like that. What I tend to actually do, though, is actually use my grids. I can say, put them at grid locations. And the nice thing about grid locations is if I choose different grids, okay, it'll actually try to put columns at the grid intersections. And why is that so good? Because the columns are the grid intersections, if the grids ever move, the columns will move with them. Okay, so it starts building this nice hierarchy of objects. So let's kind of put those in there and show you what that looks like, just to get you started with your structural modeling. Here's my little house. Okay. I got my little forest of columns there kind of hanging around. I am now ready to start putting some beams in here, because you probably have some beams in that those drawings too. We'll talk next week about slanted columns, curving columns. We got a bazillion variations on it, but that's the basic thing. Get the columns in typically at the grid locations. Next up, we'll go to beams. In my beams, I can choose sizes. What I tend to do with beams is I sort of have to say what level they're going to be placed at, like level 2. I like to actually place them in 3D, just because it's easy for me to say turn on 3D snapping, and then just kind of snap right from the top of this column to the top of that.
And I think there's another class.
Oh, no worries. We'll get you out then. That'll get you going.
class.
Okay, so that'll start that. Well, as you are done, go ahead and you'll add these. You'll start adding beam systems. We'll really go into all this stuff next week, and roofs and joists and things like that. But hopefully maybe by next week, if whoever's going to work on the structural things, get those columns in there. If you get the grids and the columns, you're in pretty good shape. Maybe some of the major beams. Let's go ahead and save that away. We're in great shape. I have a structural file. I have an architectural file. I can put these both on Dropbox, and things will all be linked together in terms of being able to see the structure instead of the architecture and vice versa. Okay. Let us go ahead and break there because we have another class busting to get on in here, I can see. So let's go ahead and break. If anyone wants to stick around and answer some questions, we'll go out to the lobby or something like that, or maybe to a little cafe, and we can look at some specific questions.
What I want you to do is start getting your collaboration setup going. And you will have questions, so bring your questions to the class or a little bit earlier than the class if you